Good morning and welcome to this week's webinar featuring the Paratech StrutDriver. My name is James Kolaczkowski and I'm your North Central U.S. Regional Manager. I anticipate this session lasting about 25 to 30 minutes. Appreciate the time that you're giving us this morning, choosing to spend a little time today together. Should be something beneficial for everybody. This is the conclusion of an ongoing series of webinars established at the beginning of the COVID-19 shutdowns. Going forward, we're looking forward to continuing this series on a modified schedule, hopefully with new material focused on additional portions of our response capability. Past webinars may be found for viewing at the link which will be provided at the conclusion of this session. Please feel free to go back, review any previous sessions you may have missed. Let us know if there's anything else that you might like to see here moving ahead. On the right-hand side of your screen is going to be the Q&A window. During this session, some of my counterparts are standing by to answer any questions you might have. It may take a few moments for us to respond to you, so please be patient. Some of my counterparts may not be the fastest typers out there, so hang with us and we will get back to you just as quickly as we possibly can. So we get started, I'd like to share just a little bit about the company. Paratech is a veteran-owned and operated business. We are a second-generation family-owned business, in fact. The company was started in 1962. The production facility is in Frankfort, Illinois. Our products are made in the USA but used worldwide. Not only do we have our office in Illinois, but we've also got a full-time office in Denmark that takes care of the whole of Europe. We are market focused on fire service, industrial, and military users. Obviously, most of you here this morning are fire service users, but please do keep us in mind as other applications pop up and we might be able to help you out with those. We do provide full service sales support. That full service sales support can be coordinated through your regional managers in North America. Those regional managers include Robert, Chris, Mike, John, myself, and then north of the border, we've got Michael and Alex up there to help you out as well. So anything you might need, they can actually help you coordinate that either through themselves or through your local distributor partner. We're happy to be of service. Just a brief disclaimer before we get started, this PowerPoint is really meant to be just a informational purpose type PowerPoint. It's not a suitable training material. Hands-on training really is going to be what you need to be able to become proficient with our products, as well as, really any other rescue products out there. Just remember, think safe, act safe, be safe. And anytime we start lifting, remember, always lift an inch and support an inch as you go. This week, we're going to cover the StrutDriver. What is it? What drove development? Why did we come out with this product? Well, the StrutDriver was designed to allow the Paratech AcmeThread Strut to be used as a lifting device. It's the most economical choice in our entire product line for lifting. It's available as an all-in-one solution or as a retrofit kit for existing shores. But why did we do this? Well, we introduced our first rescue struts back in 1992. The Paratech Rescue Acme threads are actually designed as the first self-locking support system in the world, meaning we're not relying on pins, other things to keep that strut fully extended, and the default is back to a locking position with that collar. All of these systems are designed for manual or pneumatic placement. And from day one, people wanted to know, can we lift with them? Well, vehicle stabilization kits kind of started that request. If we're going to be stabilizing vehicles, why can't we lift? Well, everything that we do is really based around this first kit for vehicles. And that first kit, it was released in 1993, and that was our standard vehicle stabilization kit. Shortly thereafter, we released the highway vehicle stabilization kit. And these two really still, to today, are the focus of what we're going to use the StrutDriver in conjunction with. Before the HFS and StrutDriver, the answer for anybody that asked, can we lift with the shores, was no. So from day one, people kept asking, can we lift, can we lift, can we lift? And everybody always said, but why? And all of our shores actually have both a threaded collar and a pneumatic fitting. If we're using that threaded collar, the question is, can you lift? Well, no, not really. You can create significant force through mechanical advantage by spinning that collar. And the collar is designed to accept a spanner wrench, but that force that we can create really isn't all that significant. I've been at trainings here in the past where people have put one of our shoring hammers onto that collar, try to create as much force as they possibly can. We max out at about 1,000 to 1,200 pounds via mechanical advantage. So really, while we can create some force, it's not a whole lot of force and really isn't going to get the job done in most cases. People would look at that pneumatic fitting and say, okay, you've got that pneumatic fitting. Why can't we just use air to lift with? Well, the problem with air is that air is compressible. So as we begin charging that shore becomes essentially like a compressed spring. All right, and if we start lifting something, so let's say we're lifting a vehicle and we're using that air pressure, as that vehicle comes up, that vehicle does what? It becomes lighter as it goes. So that vehicle becomes lighter. If we're using air to actually lift with, that air is going to want to push that load up and over, and you've got no control as far as how to actually stop that air pressure within the shore. So we don't recommend using air to actually lift with. Air is compressible again. It's essentially a charged spring that you're working with inside of that shore once you begin to charge the shore itself. The pneumatic feature, though, is typically used for trench operations or vehicle stabilization using the VSK controller. And that VSK controller, just a reminder, actually supplies low pressure air. All right, that VSK controller provides 25 PSI. It's not lifting. So just to be clear, while we do offer the VSK controller, we're not lifting with the air pressure supplied. It's just chasing the load. All right, so prior to the hydrofusion, prior to the StrutDriver, the answer was no. We don't use the Paratech shores to lift. There's just no controllable way to accomplish that. 2013, we released the hydrofusion. This hydrofusion really has become the go-to standard for lifting all the way up to today. Now, they can be used independently or in conjunction with AcmeThread or longshore struts. So we can use that hydrofusion as a standalone system when we add the strut converter, or we can use it as a integrated system when we add the longshore struts or the AcmeThread struts to that hydrofusion system. It's designed to lift and support loads up to 20,000 pounds. So just a tremendous amount of work we can accomplish with that hydrofusion setup. Anybody that's interested in learning a little bit more about the hydrofusion, my counterpart, Mike Ulibarri, actually did that presentation on hydrofusion a couple webinars ago. It's available to go back and take a look at and learn a little bit more about what the hydrofusion can do for you. The big thing, though, is that the HFS is not usable with pneumatic controls. It requires a separate pump and hose assembly. So as far as storage, it is somewhat bulky for storage with the rest of your rescue cache. So in 2017, we went ahead and we released the StrutDriver, which is what we're here to talk about today. So we talked about going all the way back to 1992. So from 1992 to 2017, this was the first time that we actually came out with something that was designed to utilize those AcmeThread shores to actually lift with. The initial release of that was actually for a retrofit kit, and that retrofit kit was designed to be added to any shore that we've sold since 1992. So pretty cool that we can go back and add this StrutDriver to anything that we've ever made as far as the AcmeThread rescue struts. Really, one of the nice parts about this, though, is that the retrofit kit is removable for storage. A lot of my customers out there that have these retrofit kits will take that off the top of the shore, sit that aside in their rig, or maybe put in a toolbox or something. So it's completely separate from the shore, and when that's removed, the shore is usable just as a standard rescue shore. The retrofit kit, though, included the gearbox, the AcmeThread nut itself, and we'll cover that here in a few minutes, and the tube end adapter. So those three items are what are actually included as part of that retrofit kit. Options for that retrofit kit remain the hex ratchet handle, the carrying handle, and the additional tube end adapters, which we'll get into here in a few minutes as well, as far as what those tube end adapters are and why you do in fact need those for your kit. In 2018, so at the next FDIC, we actually released the AcmeThread StrutDriver. It's an all-in-one configuration, so it's designed not to be taken apart. Neat part about this is that it comes in two different sizes, and we've got a stroke on that actually can run up to 21 inches. So our maximum hydrofusion length is going to be 16 inches versus, again, 21 inches here on the AcmeThread Rescue StrutDriver. So we do have additional stroke above and beyond what we can do with our heavy lifting solution. Now the StrutDriver performance features, be it the retrofit kit or the AcmeThread StrutDriver, share some things in common. To begin with, they've got a 6,000 pound lifting capacity. Designed for vehicle stabilization, structural collapse, trench shoring, soft placement ability. I mean, really the options are limitless as far as what you can use this StrutDriver for. All of our StrutDrivers are made from aircraft grade aluminum housing, so they're very, very durable. And internally, they've got alloy steel gears and hardened ball bearings, which is what makes the lifting operations with these StrutDrivers very, very simple and very, very smooth. The gearboxes on both of these are actually designed with a nice rounded contour. When we talk about that rounded contour, you can see here, that rounded contour prevents that gearbox from catching as you're lifting. And there's also a directional safety mechanism, which is right here, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes as well. But that directional safety mechanism is right there. That directional safety mechanism prevents your operators from running that shore in the wrong direction. So if that arrow is pointed up, the StrutDriver will only run up. If that arrow is pointed downwards, that StrutDriver will only run down. It's a key safety feature that's unique to this product. The StrutDriver actually, anytime we use it, be it with the retrofit kit or the AcmeThread StrutDriver, it actually imparts significant torque back to the shore itself. Now on the AcmeThread StrutDriver, we've actually got keyways on the bottom that prevent that short from twisting. On our standard shore, a lot of you may remember that the bottom of that shore itself is actually an open groove along that bottom. If we start imparting force to that open groove, it has the potential to actually allow the entire shore to twist. So when we use the retrofit kit, we're always going to install a tube end adapter, and that's what you see here. It's nothing more than a clamp that goes on the bottom of the shore. And then here at the bottom of that tube end adapter, you can see what we're doing is we're adding keyways to prevent the entire shore from twisting. So the places where we need that tube end adapter is anytime we use the retrofit kit, you're going to put one on the strut. And then for each extension to be used with the StrutDriver, we're going to need one of those tube end adapters as well. All right, so there's a case that you may need more than one, depending on what it is you're trying to work with and depending on the combination of extensions that you need for your lift. Pardon me for a moment. So as we work through this, the question oftentimes comes up, right? So we've got a 6,000-pound lifting capability with the StrutDriver. Without the StrutDriver there, though, you've functionally got just a standard AcmeThread strut. So the AcmeThread strut that the AcmeThread StrutDriver is built onto, or the Retrofit Kit gearbox is installed to, still maintains the exact same working loads as what a standard AcmeThread strut does. So when we're not using that StrutDriver, we can still refer back to that 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 safety factor. And just as a reminder, that 2-to-1 safety factor provides you load capabilities of up to 40,000 pounds at 4 feet. 4-to-1 is going to be a 20,000-pound load capacity at 4 feet using these AcmeThread struts. Anybody who's interested more in those load capacities, I'd refer you back likely to the highway stabilization kit webinar that we've done here a couple sessions ago. So what can we actually use these strut drivers for? Well, they're really ideal for standard to medium duty vehicles. So standard passenger cars really should be no problem, especially if we're using these as a pair. Standard passenger vehicles have relatively light axle loads. So you look at even this minivan here, and we're a couple thousand pounds and a couple thousand pounds as far as that axle weight. So 4,000 pounds, maybe 5,000 pounds on a more modern vehicle really should be no issue for us to use that strut driver any place that we see a passenger vehicle that we want to be able to lift. The place where we have to stop and think about what we're doing those as we get into heavy vehicles. So we take a look at those axle loads, and really the strut driver is not a great tool for providing lifts for heavier vehicles such as dump trucks, buses, and certainly over-the-road vehicles, which are much heavier than what these are. So the hydrofusion will be recommended for heavier vehicle applications instead of the strut driver itself. That question becomes, what do we do and how do we actually deploy the strut driver? And I just want to cover that real quick so everybody's kind of on the same page here. Anytime we start looking to use the strut driver, we want to do a quick 360 of the object that we need to stabilize. Pick the spot where the lifting strut's going to need to be placed, and then determine how the load is to be stabilized. When we talk about determining how the load is going to be stabilized, even though we've got that secondary locking collar on the strut driver, which is always engaged, we also want to capture that load with the secondary capture source. And we're going to cover that here a little bit later on in this session as well. We also want to obviously identify any additional hazards that may be present. So standard rescue application review before you start deploying the strut driver is going to be in force as well. We want to assemble the strut driver away from the vehicle. Add your extensions and tube end adapters as needed. And the reason we're going to assemble that away from the vehicle and kind of adjust it to its rough length is so that our people are not in potential harm's way as they're putting that together. The anchor ring on the base plate, if we're using a traditional 12x12 base plate, is going to be oriented towards the object to be stabilized so that we can use that 12x12 base plate anchor ring as a tieback for the shore itself. Although all Paratech lifting shores provide positive locking collars, we again strongly recommend that the secondary load capture system be installed. We don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. If we're using the strut driver or the hydrofusion to lift with, if that purchase point changes, and it's going to change as we lift because those angles change as a load goes up. If that purchase point changes, it's possible that purchase point could end up slipping the load itself. So we always want to have that load completely captured. And for that, we can use traditional cribbing or we can use stabilization shores if we've got those available for us to work with. So remember, lift an inch, support an inch. It's very, very important using the strut driver. Just like airbags, just like hydrofusions, anytime we start lifting a load, we want to make sure that if something happens to that lifting device, if our lifting device kicks out for some reason, that we've got that load captured and that load's not going to come back down on us. So again, we're going to adjust that strut driver to the estimated required length before approaching the load. And the way that's done is that the strut driver actually allows you to pull the threaded end out and spin the collar down and then reseat it into the gearbox. So we don't have to spin that gearbox to extend the strut itself. we can again pull that strut out, spin the collar down, reset it in the gearbox, and go ahead and begin to accomplish our lift. And then importantly, we need to make sure that we've got some sort of anchor figured out, be it a ratchet strap, a chain, a picket. It could even be something as simple as a angle on a curb to keep that base plate from kicking out on us. Now, something we covered extensively again in that highway stabilization kit webinar was angles that we're working with here. And I'm not going to get too much into that this morning. Anybody that's interested in those angles and a little bit more information on angles should go back and take a look at that highway stabilization kit webinar. But just a quick reminder here for stabilization, 45 to 55 degrees for light vehicles, 60 to 75 degrees for larger vehicles. We cover why that's the case for those both in the highway stabilization kit as well as the HFS, and I believe we also cover that in the rescue vehicle or heavy rescue extrication kit webinar from last week as well. The thing though here is that for lifting shores, we want to go ahead and set those lifting shores at a different angle, which is going to be 60 to 80 degrees for lifting struts. And the reason for that is that with stabilization, we want both support in the vertical as well as support in the horizontal to keep shifting left to right on that vehicle. When we start getting into lifting shores, we want to make sure that that force is as much in the up and down direction as possible. So that 60 to 80 degree angle for lifting shores is going to be really ideal for what we're working with here. And just as an illustration, as far as what we've got, the setup as far as the shores are concerned, again, 45 to 55 degrees typical for stabilization and 60 to 80 degrees for those lifting struts. So that's a nice little animation that just kind of gives you an idea of how those shores would actually be in relation to each other. Again, this was covered extensively in some of our other webinars, so if you want to get into those angles, feel free to go back and refer to the HFS webinar or the highway vehicle stabilization webinar, which are all available via the links that will be sent out after today. But really, when we start looking at this, we talk about angles. All right, we want to make sure that as we place our shores, especially if we're using two shores together, that those shores need to be placed at matching angles. If one shore is, say, set at 45 degrees and one shore is set at 75 degrees, what's going to happen? Well, that 45 degree shore is going to want to push against that 75 degree shore, and it becomes difficult to control the load. The other thing that is really important as we start setting up these shores is even if we're off a little bit as far as our angles, we can overcome that by coordinating our lift. And when we talk about coordinating our lift, it's pretty important to have somebody who's got eyes on that load to be able to work with. Okay, they can eye that load, they can see as that load starts to drift one way or another, that maybe the operators of the hydrofusions or the strut drivers can actually stop, kind of catch up with each other and make sure that they're bringing that load up in an equal manner. So again, easiest way to accomplish that is by matching your angles as closely as possible. And then the secondary kind of safety there to make sure that we're able to accomplish our lift is to have one person kind of eyeballing that lift and calling the lift. So maybe you've got a command officer standing back from the load. They can stop one side while the other side keeps going. You know, use hand signals in noisy environments. We can use visual cues in noisy environments, whatever happens to work for you. But having one person to coordinate it is pretty important as we're working with these strut drivers and accomplishing our lift. Now, for operation of the strut driver itself, the first thing we want to go ahead and take a look at is we want to make sure that the selector knob is set up in a manner that allows us to operate the strut driver in the direction we want to go. So if you take a look, that arrow is what I talked about a little bit earlier. Right now that's set to the up position. So the only direction that strut driver is going to allow you to run it is up when that arrow is pointed up. Conversely, if we need to move that down, to adjust that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to reach in, grab that knob, pull it out and twist it to the down position. That's going to allow us to operate the strut driver in the downward motion. It's a really neat safety feature here that's included on this device, again, to prevent your operator from accidentally running it the wrong way, which is not what we want in any rescue situation. Now, there's a couple of different ways to actually run the strut driver as we get into actually using it as a lifting device. Now, kind of my preference would be the manual handle adjustment. Using a manual ratchet handle really provides fine actuation of the strut driver itself. The ratchet handle is shown. It's available as an add-on option. You can also use your own ratchet handle if you already have one. That does use a 3/4 inch hex drive, so that 3/4 inch hex bit should be readily available from a slightly more comprehensive tool shop out there or your local tool delivery. You may even have one already waiting for you in your toolbox back at the station. Secondary method would be the power drive adjustment. Now we start looking at the power drive adjustment. When we first released this strut driver, we expected the strut driver to be able to be used with just a standard duty type screw drive and standard duty battery drill. The problem with that is that standard duty battery drill does tend to wear out and also has significant risk for kickback. It's just not designed for high torque applications. So we start using a power drive adjustment. We do recommend that you use a heavy duty driver, such as an angle drive, something that's actually got that additional leverage for those heavy duty type applications that you would use a more powerful type driver for. The neat part about this, though, is that it provides just really, really great speed. So we can move very, very quickly with this. We can accomplish quite a bit of lift almost instantaneously using a power drive type setup. So again, let's avoid standard drills. Let's use a higher torque designed drill. Again, maybe an angle drill, something else, again, something that's designed for that higher torque type application more than just a traditional shop tool. So Strut Driver really has numerous applications we can work with, underride and overrides for lighter vehicles. We can use it for shifting loads, so we can use it just to push. We can use this in structural collapse. We can use it in vehicle stabilization. And the place that we oftentimes will set this up as far as a practice, and that's what I'm going to cover here in a minute, is how we go out and we actually train at your department. So we'll set this up with a vehicle stabilization type setup with a secondary limb entrapment. So if you've got, for example, an arm underneath that A post, it's a great tool for that sort of simple quick lift type application. So again, common applications, and the simplest one here is going to be a tension buttress style lift. Again, the angles between the struts are very important. If you take a look here, those angles are nearly perfect on that vehicle. If the struts are again lifted at or set at different angles, rather, that angle that's a little bit shallower is actually going to push the vehicle one way or another. So again, as we match these up, make sure that those two shores that you're using those strut drivers on are really as closely matched as we possibly can make them. We can use these as a single point roll. All right, when we talk about a single point roll, you may only need to lift one point on the vehicle. You may not be concerned about having that secondary control, and we can actually use it at a single point to be able to roll a vehicle or a load off of something. Now, one of the really neat things here in this photo, and I don't know if you guys can see it on that side, but I'm going to zoom in here. One of the really neat things on this photo, though, is that they've used something else other than a traditional 12 by 12 base on the fixed end of the shore. So you can see here they've actually used a more traditional vehicle stabilization style base on that fixed end. Just because we traditionally reach for a 12 by 12 base for lifting applications of stabilization doesn't mean that's the only way to accomplish it. So when we talk about that, you can kind of see there, that's a little bit different kind of twist on how we use bases on our shores. And just as a reminder, there is no right side up or upside down to our shores. So there may be cases where the strut driver should be pointed towards the ground instead of towards the vehicle. And there are no right or wrongs as far as the bases that you choose as an operator to use with our shores. So we can use setups like this where we're not even using a 12 by 12 base or a 6 by 6 base or really anything flat. It's nothing more than an angle going into a corner on that debris pile there. We can also do a stop the crush and relieve the load type setup, which is what you see here. This was that class I was at in Michigan here a few years ago. Thanks to Start Rescue for allowing me to join them. They set this up, though, with a piece of timber up here on the top of the strut driver, along with some plywood along the soft wall of that trailer, and really, set that up in a manner to be able to stop the load from coming down and collapsing any further on the vehicle that is just off to the left-hand side of that photo that you can't see there in that picture. Another common application would be a single point high lift, which is kind of what you see here. So when we start talking about a single point high lift, really that single point high lift is something that we would set up, and it takes the place of a high lift jack or other, higher lifting device that we might reach for. But just, don't feel like you always have to use these as pairs. Don't feel like you always have to use them in more traditional type applications. Any place you need to create up to that 6,000 pounds of force, even in a single point like what you see here, is perfectly acceptable to deploy with the strut driver. We can also use it for structural collapse. So if you take a look at this load, that load may be above 6,000 pounds, but the pivot force for that load, in other words, if we've got this side on the ground and we're lifting from this side, we're not trying to lift that entire slab, right? We're not going to balance the entire load on top of that slab itself. We're doing nothing more than pivoting it there. So that 6,000 pounds of force in that given case was actually enough to allow that slab itself to be pushed up and over and actually create some clearance there in that debris pile. Some ideas for department trainings, and one of the most simple ways that we traditionally do this for an in-service type setup. We know hands-on experience is going to be a key anytime we want to get these out and deploy with them successfully. So as far as a setup for you guys at your department, go ahead and get an individual vehicle, put that vehicle on its roof. We want to go ahead and trap some sort of simulation, so a training dummy or something else underneath that A-post, someplace in that area of the roof. And the challenge for your team is going to be to figure out how to lift that car enough to be able to pull that entrapment out or clear that entrapment from underneath that post of the vehicle itself. It's a large group. Go ahead and split into a couple different teams. We know that hands-on experience is going to be very important anytime we start working with this kit or any of our kits, really. That, if you get too big a group, people tend to kind of hang back a little bit. People don't pay attention to what's going on. And you end up with 3 or 4 people that are actually in there running the system. So again, split up into teams. Very, very important anytime we do an in-service, just to make sure that everybody's getting some hands-on time with the kit. We want to give each team the opportunity to lift and capture the car. And we're going to pay particular attention to the angle placement and coordinating the lift. So when you've got a vehicle on its roof, your room for error is actually fairly wide. So if it's not perfect, they're going to see how that car actually shifts one direction or another. And that gives them the opportunity to go back and really take a look at how those angles interact with each other, and give them the opportunity to go back and kind of correct what they've done if something didn't work out right. As we lift, though, we do want to pay particular attention to capturing that load. In this case, you can see that there was actually traditional cribbing used underneath the roof. So while there's not a secondary set of stabilization shores in this particular picture, again, there's your cribbing right there underneath the roof, actually capturing that vehicle and keeping it from coming back down once we begin that lift. So after you're done, we always like to process what they might do differently, what works, what doesn't. And really the StrutDriver we see as being something that, really is a addition to other rescue training opportunities we might be doing already. It may not be a standalone training for your department. It's really oftentimes more likely that it's something that'll be integrated into some other training events that are going on already. So the StrutDriver can be added to a variety of stabilization kits or individual components. We've already touched on the standard vehicle stabilization kit. We've already touched on the highway vehicle stabilization kit. The StrutDriver is designed to be added to those certainly, but can also be added to other rescue kits. Any place you've got any AcmeThread struts that have been produced since the early 1990s. It's a large number of accessories though that are available that really improve the functionality of that StrutDriver system, beginning with chain. If your department doesn't have chain, we do recommend that you go ahead and add some chain there. Having that chain allows you to sling a load. It improves the options you've got as far as how you're actually capturing that system. Here on this red vehicle on the side, you can see we've actually slung that load. And if we had a StrutDriver in position, we could actually lift using that chain sling. Same thing really over here. If we had a StrutDriver in position on that load there, we could actually lift that system completely off that vehicle using that chain as well. Particularly on round loads, round objects, there's oftentimes not a clear purchase point. So if you don't have a clear purchase point, that chain really, really does come in helpful to be able to go in and choke the load and lift via that choke. We can also add a multi-chain base to this. So if your department doesn't carry 3/8, but they do carry 1/2-inch chain, go ahead and add that multi-chain base, and that works great with the StrutDriver as well. And certainly anytime we start lifting, we need to figure out a way to chase the load. Now, the traditional way to chase that load is to have somebody right up next to that vehicle, right next to what they're working with there, and manually raising the strut and spinning the collar as they go. We can add that vehicle stabilization controller though to your system, and that way you've got your lifting shores, which your personnel are actually operating by hand, and then you've got your secondary capture shores that are using that air pressure to be able to chase that load as you go. We can also add 6x6 bases. This one again does not show that lifting device in there, but we could add easily a StrutDriver onto the top of that shore there and use that shore to be able to lift that load back off the car. So this is kind of a hybrid type application, but certainly, leaning towards the structural collapse type applications. And in this case, we're using that just simply as a vertical lifting device, to be able to remove that load from that vehicle. But 6x6 bases are nice to have around with any of our lifting solutions as well. Now, when you order from us, so when you get a retrofit kit, there's some things to keep in mind. The retrofit kit does require that the Acme thread nut be replaced on each of the strut where the StrutDriver is to be used. So every strut you plan to use with that StrutDriver needs a new StrutDriver Acme thread nut. All right. And the way that's accomplished, the way you actually replace that, is you go ahead and you remove the keyed end of the shore. When we talk about the keyed end of the shore, that's going to be this section right here, and that's threaded on. All right. So that keyed section of the shore is actually going to be removed. First thing you're going to do is you're going to remove the set screw. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to use a medium temperature torch. We really don't want to use a high temperature cutting torch, although if you're particularly careful, you may be able to get away with that. But a medium temperature torch, such as a propane torch or something else, go in and heat up the end of that shore really well, because that is Loctited on very well. So by heating that end of the shore up, that's going to break that Loctite free and allow you to remove it a little bit more easily. Once we heat that up, we want to go ahead and place the AcmeThread portion of the strut in a bench vise. Now, to prevent marring of the threads themselves, we can go ahead and wrap those threads with a soft cloth or something else to keep them from being scraped up. But you do want to put that in a bench vise and crank that down pretty well as far as the tightness. And then I'll tell you a little tip that I've got for you is once you put that in the bench vise, if you reach for one of your multi bases, which is what's shown right here, and you install that on the threaded end of the shore, so on your keyway there, that then gives you the opportunity to come in and with, say, a ratchet extension or another bar, use that through hole and basically create a T-handle to be able to twist that keyed end of the shore right off of the strut. All right, so again, remove that nut, so remove your set screw, heat the end of the shore, unscrew it, and then at the end of all of it, you're going to put that back together in the opposite direction. So once we remove that keyed end, we're going to spin the old collar off, spin your StrutDriver collar onto that, and then reinstall the keyed end with the Loctite that's included as part of the kit. All right, so relatively simple. Anybody that needs some help, though, can feel free to reach out to their regional manager, and they'll be happy to talk them through that process. But the big key there, again, is to go ahead and heat up the end of that shore to break that Loctite free, because otherwise you're going to fight with it, and it does become a bit of a bear. Now, one of the slides I did leave in here was regarding storage. I know the question comes up fairly frequently here. How can we store this equipment? The answer is whatever works best in your rig is fine with us as far as how you store it. So vertical storage is great. Horizontal storage is fine. And that goes for not only the StrutDriver, but really any of our rescue struts as well can be stored in either configuration. Here in the U.S., anybody that's interested in finding some new sources for funding can feel free to reach out to Fire Grants Help. Now, we are a sponsor of Fire Grants Help, and what we sponsor with this organization is grant research, as well as a review of your final application that you're looking to submit for grant assistance. We do not sponsor the grant writing portion of that. That is not allowed. So Fire Grants Help can also help you out with grant writing if that's something that you need as well. But the neat part about this company is that they will do some additional research for you. They will look and see what they can find out as far as additional grant resources that are available in your specific area, right down to state by state. Even local grants are sometimes accessible through Fire Grants Help. And some things that otherwise you and I might not think about. I've had departments over the years that have gotten DNR grants for stabilization because they had a specific need in their area. So again, reach out to Fire Grants Help. Great resource for you to help you find a little bit more about what might be available as far as additional funding sources in your area. Now, as we get into this, we're moving forward, and I mentioned earlier that this is actually the last in our previously scheduled series of webinars. So after this call, you're going to go ahead and you're going to be getting a survey. And in that survey, we're going to be asking you a few questions that are really helpful to us. The question of what would you like to see going forward? What day of the week's best for you? What time is most convenient? And are there additional topics you'd like to see in this format? So if you can help us out when we're all done here, please take a moment to fill out that survey and let us know what you'd like to see next. Certainly, we're going to continue this series, maybe at a bit of a reduced frequency than once a week, but should be good going forward as we can get more involved in, covering some things that you folks might want to hear from us out there. So we are involved again in a little bit of everything out there: planes, trains, cars, trucks, military, industrial. So just because you might be coming to me today as a fire service person, don't hesitate to give us a call if you've got industrial needs as well. If you're also military duty, certainly there's a lot of our equipment out there in military applications. So keep us in mind, no matter what the need is, and do know that our equipment can be used in a variety of different applications, things that you might not otherwise think of as being traditional rescue applications as well. So again, you're going to be getting a follow-up email from your local regional sales manager. Feel free to ask any questions off to the right-hand side of the screen here as we conclude today. That Q&A section will be open for quite some time yet. And again, if you don't feel right about asking that Q&A and you want a little bit more interaction with your regional sales manager, you'll be getting an email follow-up from them that you can respond to there. So there's going to be a short video outlining the use of the system also in that, and that's a brand new video, so do take the opportunity to take a look at that StrutDriver video. Pretty cool what they're doing out back at the factory these days. So that's going to be a link to the quotes section and a recording of this webinar if you want to go back and watch me talk again for 35 minutes or so. But anyways, we hope you enjoyed it. Everybody stay safe out there, be well, and thanks again for taking some time to be part of part of our session here this morning. So everybody be well. Thanks again.